Welcome to today's episode. We're going to be joined by Bryce Weiner on the issue of cryptocurrency and the bigger picture. He will also be talking about his reputation as the Bitcoin Antagonist. Bryce, thank you very much for your time. I'm not going to squander it away. Let me really get into it. What I found interesting is that you're now known, or the euphemism that I recognize of you is the Bitcoin Antagonist. And I really want to see why that's the case. Why do they call you that?
There's this perception, and for a long time it was correct and needed and necessary, that we should all band together and present Bitcoin as a unified front because, we all want it to succeed, and everybody who holds Bitcoin, wants the price to go up so we can all get rich and retire and live a life of luxury and become the next 1%. However, that's not necessarily true or needed. I kind of disagreed with that entire philosophy because I felt that in order to, it's a greater philosophical sort of issue. If you're one of those people that wants a more egalitarian, more decentralized, more personal world, as opposed to the bombarded media saturated environment in which we currently live. A lot of things have to change. And quite frankly, there's a lot of folks that simply don't understand how things work and how things connect. One thing leads to another and that sort of thing. And that's fine. However, you have to attack the root causes. And you can't compromise along the way. The ends never justify the means. So when you go out to, and then let's take Bitcoin then, for instance. And here's this technology, nobody owns it, nobody runs it, nobody's really responsible for it, except for the people who use it. And we can do anything we want with it. And one of the first things that was done was to recreate the propaganda and marketing paradigms that have been so successful in creating a culture and society that we all hate and made Bitcoin necessary. So it's like, I don't know if you have kids, but if you have kids, and they grow up and they become teenagers and they go out in the world, and the first thing that kids do, and we all did this, was we went out and we did all of the things we used to do when we lived with our parents. And then we realized that doesn't work, that we're responsible for ourselves now. And the way that we used to approach problems and solve problems doesn't apply when there's no safety net. And, and if you're familiar with Bitcoin and the libertarian philosophies that it seems to embody, then, there's a natural synergy between these paradigms. So all of that being said, why, now that massive preface is out there, why, the antagonist? Because somebody always has to say no. Someone always has to question, are we doing things right? And when I say right, Bitcoin represents an opportunity to change the world to be better than the way we found it. And we are those people. This generation, we have this, the people who are between the ages of, 14 and 50 are the people who are responsible for carrying this forward into the future as we grow older and do more with this technology. Kids who are in the 5, 6 years old in the first grade right now, entering grade this year, will never know a world without Bitcoin. And how those children learn and grow up with this technology is purely within our hands. Nobody else is going to do this for us. And if we allow it to be done by somebody else, we're going to get things like, it's going to be branded as the dark, nasty currency that the only thing it enables is evil stuff. And that is the perception, even now, with as much of the echo chamber that Bitcoin has. It is still not much larger than it was, last year as far as the mainstream. Now there's a great deal more of B2B, and there's a great deal of interest in the technology that underlies Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Blockchain technology. Everybody knows this. It's been discussed ad nauseum for the past couple of months. But Bitcoin itself is still this minority. And while there are some firms like NASDAQ, for instance, who are experimenting with blockchain technology and offering goods and services, and they just announced this at Money 2020, and with folks like the Winklevoss twins, who have their FDIC-insured institutional Bitcoin exchange, you see that there's this progression in Bitcoin towards the integration of these existing fiat systems, becoming a part of the greater macroeconomic whole. And this is, in fact, what everybody needs in order for Bitcoin to do anything greater than be what it was in 2013. If these things never happened, Bitcoin would never progress past that Mt. Gox phase. Period, in a sentence. Everybody knows it. It's one of the reasons why Mt. Gox had to disappear, almost as a force of nature. If you want to abandon conspiracy theory as to why Mt. Gox crashed altogether, then because I consider it like the 9/11 of Bitcoin.
Oh, really?
Oh, absolutely. That was a manufactured event. Absolutely, a total inside job, 100%. And the individuals who orchestrated that event do not have the gravitas that Don Rumsfeld has. So they're not going to be able to cover it up quite as completely. And I know for a fact that there are some tangential investigations going on right now by some certain law enforcement agencies that may very well cross into that area.
Wow. I didn't even conceive of that. I didn't even think that it could be a false flag. But now that you say these things, there's a buzzer in me, and it's telling me about the management of perception. Really, that's weird.
Please understand that this is not I don't believe that it was some big, huge, dark government conspiracy. I don't want you to take that away at all.
Okay.
This was an event manufactured by Bitcoiners to get rid of Mt. Gox and Mark Karpelès, so Bitcoin could be taken seriously. And because he wouldn't shut up and he wouldn't go away, so they took him out.
And you said hold on, let's pause it there, because man, we're going really down the rabbit hole here. One of the greatest points that I can, let's start off with is you're talking about this feel, this maybe this collectivist feel in people, that they want this unitarian front in which everything is unified and it's solidified, and we're going to arrive to the solution because we're all together and there is a one season world and we're all going to be happy. I think there's a proclivity in the public to not want the complexification of issues, but just give them the superficial glance in order for them to consume and just go on about their daily day. And I know that sounds kind of critical, but honestly, I really see people living in this amnesic state where they forget about things. And like price upticks in Bitcoin gets everyone's attention, but only because it's an event and it's happening. But if they were to remove themselves from one particular event and look at the grand scale, the big picture, right? One of your statements really encapsulates it, but I don't want to just, verbatim, word by word say it. In essence, you were saying, I want to make blockchain or cryptocurrencies practical. I want to use it and get my product online and get it delivered. And that seems so straightforward that people feel like, well, what's the big deal in that? Well, that we have to ask these authority figures in order for the transaction to take place. You see, authorities, the government, banks, all these folks want to get in between of peaceful transactions. So when they do that, they're the middleman. They get their money, they get their cut, they get power. But another point that you were talking about, how not only do the public has that proclivity, the minority in which is the Bitcoin community, this highly trained and informed people that know knowledge that others don't, they want to become the leaders and the role models and the authority figures. You were saying, you were alluding to that point. Can you explain that, or am I going in the wrong direction, please?
No, you're absolutely right, and there's a danger in what you had just said. First of all, I agree with your characterization of the Bitcoin community completely. And second of all, I would say that there's a danger in what has grown up as informational dissemination within the Bitcoin community, in that it does create this sort of sense of superiority, almost a superiority complex. I mean, I have straight out, I mean, in fact, I just made a blog post. I wrote an article not too long ago, or just a few days ago, in which I still use those very words, a superiority complex. And that's what it is. And it comes from exactly what you said, this perception that the Bitcoin community is somehow in possession of arcane or occult knowledge that makes them more informed or better well-adjusted or more future-thinking than anyone else, when in fact it's absolutely untrue. It's completely untrue. And because it's untrue, and I'll just go ahead and respond to the obvious without you even asking. It's untrue because such a perception refuses or ignore or either through willful refusal or just simple ignorance of the rest of the world and how it operates and how we got to where we are. And you can't just watch a bunch of YouTube videos online or read a bunch of David Icke's books and suddenly think you've got it all figured out and the world is an illusion and you've got the right answer. That's just not how it works. And there are very practical machinations, processes, procedures that have to be followed if you want to, and now here's the important part, if you want to play in that world. And Bitcoin is no different. It has exactly the same sorts of, and it didn't have to be this way. This was purely a function of the choices of the individual people that implemented the technology and run the companies and corporations and investment firms that we have today. They made the decisions that created the environment that we see a large portion of the industry now immersed in. And that's it's pretty significant. It's still a pretty significant portion of the Bitcoin, industry infrastructure. And while certain companies have even attempted to distance themselves from the greater Bitcoin infrastructure, as soon as there is something positive to say about Bitcoin, they're the first ones in line to take credit. And, it's this back and forth swinging of a pendulum. It's a very tenuous tightrope implementing technology in the Bitcoin space, because you must respect that not everybody is as well-meaning and as well-intentioned as you might be. And that's just life, granted. But Bitcoin is often covered in these rose-colored glasses of transparency and decentralization, and we're all working for a better tomorrow. And the stark reality is that's simply not true. Not everybody in the Bitcoin space is working for a better tomorrow. Not everybody who says they're working for a better tomorrow actually is. They are in fact lying to you in order to profit. But that's life. That's capitalism. And Bitcoin, in fact, is not cleansed of any of these things at all. They have, in fact, what the danger is in assuming that everybody is as well-meaning and well-intentioned as you are, when in fact, I would even go so far as to say it's simply the vocal minority on Reddit. Yeah,
I mean, the reality is a stark contrast from what we want it to be. I did talk about this issue sometime. If some of my listeners might be aware of this, about the difference between seeing the world as it is and as it should be. Typically, people want to project their desires or their promises of a better tomorrow onto others because they're in themselves uncertain about their existence. So this uncertainty creates anxiety. So people project these images, simulations where they get entertained. So the way it works out is that we have these up and rising developers or pundits or people who are in the community and they're very vocal, right? And we assume because they're at the hierarchy of the in group that they're validated and qualified in all of their opinions. And people do get led by these things. I mean, they don't investigate the origin of their idolatry because people like leaders like to build up these idols and they rely on them as if they were crutch so they can diffuse all the information and they say, well, I watched this YouTube video and I know exactly what you're talking about. Do you really? Honestly, do you really know what's happening?
And not only that, but then suddenly when things turn out not as planned, they can say, oh, well, it wasn't my fault. And that's, it's a large part of why I change how I interface with the public.
Really?
Because, oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
Tell me the contrast, please. I'd like to know because I remember our last conversation. Well, you can check it out on the podcast, but I can't remember. It was a couple of months back, and I want to see what's the difference. Tell me.
Well, the difference is, I stopped trying to convince people that to listen, put it that way, to pay attention, and that there was something important that they were missing. And in doing so, I have no problem admitting that, when we all go through this, and we all go through these periods of personal growth. And one of the things, and this is not my first time being in public, mind you. I used to do conspiracy theory stuff, and some of that information is still out there. I've been on radio shows and stuff before talking about aliens and UFOs, things far weirder than Bitcoin. And those, the Bitcoin experience, the thing that makes Bitcoin different than all of those other things. And I think that's really, going back to your first question, I really can't shake that. Why am I the antagonist of Bitcoin? Well, because this is not my first rodeo. I've done other things. And I don't need Bitcoin in order to have a successful career or find a fulfilling life or grow as a person, because I've already found a path that suits me just fine. Part of that has been being involved in this period in history with Bitcoin. I just happen to be one of those people who watched it and know the technology very intimately. I am a developer. That's my background as a professionally. And I've done it for Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies. So I come at this with a perspective of, I'm not 20 something just starting out in my life. I'm not 30 something, trying to build a name for myself in my career. I'm 40 something. I have a name. I have a career. I have a well-centered life. And if Bitcoin is going to succeed, you have to be able to include everyone. And it will, no matter if you like it or not. So it's like this. So then the question is, well, how is everyone going to be included, even if they don't want to be included, right? You look at the statement that Jamie Dimon made. Bitcoin must be stopped.
I wonder why he is saying that, right?
It was trolling in the way that Paul Krugman said Bitcoin is evil. And both of them are, in fact, correct if you come from a very specific worldview. And if you are not someone who follows fintech or banking or economics on a macro scale, then you don't get the joke. And that's what these people, they were making jokes. And it was a joke at the expense of those who have the most invested in the existing paradigm. And I even responded in the same manner on my Twitter feed by saying that Chase is afraid once Bitcoin stopped because they're trying to implement all of Bitcoin's technology and failing, and which is in fact true. Chase Pay is in fact a fiat implementation of several of the Bitcoin improvement proposals. And if you look at it, that's exactly what it is. And it was pretty hilarious that they're trying to strong arm it when their own, fiat remittance app, their Square competitor, doesn't. I mean, it's terrible. It's awful. It's a terrible, terrible application. And if you've ever watched anyone try and use Chase's payment platform, you'd see that they've just taken it and mangled it completely. So I don't really. Banks need Bitcoin to succeed,
right?
For very simple reasons. However, they can't participate. So, if you're not comfortable with people like me, and I'm a Bitcoin supporter, I'm there, I'm a part of it. And if you can't deal with people like me, then people like Jamie Dimon will never make sense to you. And if people like Jamie Dimon never make sense to you, you will never truly see what's going on and how Bitcoin fits into the greater scheme of things.
Let's talk about that really, because the disruptive nature of Bitcoin is not something that we go into really down into the mechanics of it. We just assume that once we arrive to a point, nirvana will happen and everything else will be taken care of. So
right.
let's really talk about the practicality of it. First of all, what's the context? Where are we currently living? We're living on the way that I see it, under enemy territory, where our psychological makeup is conditioned by people who are behind the shadows, but they don't do it directly. They do it indirectly through the money system. The very money that we use conditions us and makes us more dependent on the bankers. How do you see it? What is the context, and what will be the effects of Bitcoin if people activate their liberty and use it?
In order to get Bitcoin, you have to go through what is essentially a Bitcoin service provider, either an exchange or a platform such as Coinbase or Circle or some of the things that folks have in development that they're not talking about. And these service providers are endpoints in the ecosystem and cover that last mile to the consumer, to where someone enters the ecosystem and then participates in Bitcoin. Because the old days of being able to mine Bitcoin, and because when you say be your own bank, that's what that means. Banks print money. They create money. And if you can't create money, you're not a bank, period, end of sentence. So in the day when mining became unaffordable for the average person, then suddenly, that be your own bank paradigm disappeared. And now you have to rely on the service providers in order to enter into the ecosystem. These service providers are gatekeepers of the fiat economy. And you see this in both the customer service of Coinbase and Circle, in the sense that they will police your financial transactions. And the Bitcoin that comes to and from your wallets in these systems are data mined. That's why they exist, to make sure that you're spending your money, that you're transmitting into Bitcoin on the well-lit paths of commerce, and not doing anything like playing Satoshi dice or spending your coins on darknet markets or anything of that nature. You have to go through a significant process if you want to play in those darker areas of the society, which are completely possible and legal to a degree, in the confines of discussing currencies such as Bitcoin. It's certainly legal to do so. Now, we'll talk about the legality of owning and operating one of those platforms. That's something else entirely. However, these organizations, these companies have, and there are others in the space as well that are like minor players that implement their own sort of data mining based on social media or whatever. And and then, basically make sure that they become the enforcers of the existing paradigm. And because they will deny your transactions or disable your accounts if you do something they don't like. A vast portion of what we have right now is in fact no better than what than PayPal. And that's really the issue, is there is no reason to use Bitcoin over PayPal. None. Zero.
You're going to get a lot of flack, or I'm going to get a lot of flack for this. I want to investigate that a little bit further. Let me understand this. You're saying there's no reason as to why one will use Bitcoin instead of PayPal. Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. Sure. It's just easier.
Yeah. And I also see that it's accepted almost everywhere, and people don't really have to learn about it.
It's not even the acceptance. It's that you don't have to, people, one of the appeals of Bitcoin is that it's, compared to our modern banking system, it's very easy to understand because it's mathematics. And there's this mistaken illusion of transparency that's suddenly created because you think you're able to understand the actual way your money moves and how it's created, that you understand the economy that utilizes it. And that in fact is not the case. And when it comes to the simplicity of understanding how the Bitcoin economy works and how PayPal fits into your, first of all, you have to understand how the Bitcoin economy works and then integrate it into your financial plan for yourself, your personal financial plan.
Okay.
Or you can just use PayPal and not have to worry about how all this shit works because you already know, because it's everything you already grew up with.
Yeah, that is true. You're pointing out to something that is inherent in human nature. We want prepackaged, ready-made solutions. We don't want to delve into the complex, nitty-gritty and understand the whole formula. We just want the thing to work.
That's right. And you know what? That's just people.
Yes.
And you can be mad about it. And you can write, and people can and have written, all kinds of blog posts and articles about it and nauseum. But the simple fact of the matter is, people don't care how their money works now. They don't care how Bitcoin works.
Yeah, here's to the point. That I feel like we're getting to, which is now you say that you're in a position where you don't really care to change people's perspective on the matter. You know that it works, and you know how it works, and what it can do for you, and that's a great position to be in. Myself, I feel like either way, whether I'm in a bad or a good position, it's somewhat irrelevant or completely irrelevant to try to change people's perspective, because it all hinges on a choice to pursue an interest or the information as it leads. If people really wanted to learn, they would, and they make the choice for it. You see, it's kind of like also the matter of choosing your authority. People don't want authority because it comes with responsibility. Authority over your own actions, it becomes a burden.
I think that there's even a much easier way of understanding this. And you can look at the way that people discuss Bitcoin, the icon, even myself, the way that we all discuss it is you can tell who's afraid to be wrong and who isn't. When you talk about personal responsibility, it's that fear of being wrong, making mistakes. And we create systems in our society and in our financial systems that reduce the amount of worry that one might have that they are making a mistake. And it is very easy to, even with implementing Bitcoin technology, to fall back into that safety net of fiat. And that is, in fact, what the majority of investment in the space has been. Now, to our greater point,
okay,
where is Bitcoin headed and how does it fit in? This was important. It was important that the money go the wrong way first. Does that make sense?
Yes, and let me exemplify it in the smaller sense. Why people are afraid of mistakes, because
Sure.
they feel like no correction can come after that. That is a set and final reality. Mistakes are uncorrected and become corruption. So I see mistakes as a very good part, of my being, because I get to understand my other side, the erroneous part, and it motivates me to integrate both parts and become something bigger and better and much more sophisticated. Is that something like what you're talking about?
Yeah, well, exactly. And here's the thing. I'm 40 years old. In fact, my birthday is tomorrow. I'll be 41.
Ooh, happy birthday. Happy birthday to you, man.
Thank you. And I'm like grandpa in Bitcoin. I mean, there's a few people that understand and work with this technology that are 40 years or even over the age of 30, really. And I mean, it's pretty astounding when you think about it. This is literally, if you think about, and being 40, I look back at the decisions I made in my early and mid 20s, and I'm like, oh my goodness. And here are the individuals who are now, who are cheerleaders for implementing certain, things that are supposed to change our culture. And you just look at them like, oh my gosh, really? I've been in IT, since I was a kid. I started out literally as a telephone hacker and phreaker, with a PH, if you're familiar with those terms.
Yes, I am.
When I was a teenager, literally like there were still places where Captain Crunch whistles still worked. So that being said, when, I was in the IT industry during the tech bubble, and I actually made money in Netscape. And I think that, I actually talked about that before. But Netscape is gone. And a lot of those large players are gone. And they made a lot of money and made a huge splash. And they had a contribution to make, which carried forward in the technology that succeeded them in things like Mozilla and Firefox and Chrome. And in these investments that are currently being made, if you look at it in the same way, infamously is pets.com, that was supposed to revolutionize the way that people, buy pet food. The decisions that have been made already, and this is the magnitude of where we have been to integrate Bitcoin into the larger macroeconomic paradigm and have blockchain technology carried forward along as well. So if you look at it in the paradigm of what happened in the internet explosion, the dot-com bubble, and now apply it to what's going on right now in modern finance, the groundwork has been laid for the next Firefox of money, or the next Chrome of money. However, Chrome, was created by a commercial institution, Google. And what's more importantly is the vast majority of players that began the dot-com bubble no longer exist. And we're going to see that within the Bitcoin community. And it's going to come within the next 18 months. And it's going to come exactly when the price of Bitcoin is at its highest.
Yeah, because I was wanting to know where the journey was leading to, but like the things that you said, I wanted to take a break and remind the listener what you're talking about. It's a conceptual evolution. Things don't stay static. They evolve, they fall. And we really do need a correction in the Bitcoin community and market in perspective and philosophy in the approach that we use these items and the way we cheerlead the whole movement to go one way or the other. Let's not build up heroes. So for the concluding last 15 minutes of this broadcast, let's talk about the ultimate journey. Where do you see Bitcoin going in the next 18 months? Tell me about that.
I've said this many, many times, and I think it's very easy for people to see this at this point based on the players that have entered the game currently and the perspective at which those large financial institutions see Bitcoin. So first of all, understand that the large institutional investments made into the Bitcoin infrastructure have been mostly in liquidity. And allowing Coinbase to do things like instantaneous trades between fiat and Bitcoin. That takes two things. Number one, a large pool of Bitcoin, and number two, a large pool of money. And so when you hear about 75 million, 25 million, $40 million being given to these companies, that's what that money is for. It's for that liquidity so they can get bigger and do more transactions faster, that sort of thing. First, that's number one. Number two, all of these individuals, they don't really care. It's like a low risk entry point for these institutions to be able to have skin in the game. And they probably gave up some, some equity of these companies gave up some equity for that money, obviously. So now these institutions have skin in the game. So if the Bitcoin price goes up and Bitcoin succeeds, well, they just hedge their bets and everything's fine. And they can keep an eye on it.
Right.
I mean, the one thing that Bitcoin is great for is data mining because, hey, blockchain. The blockchain is the big thing. So, and it's a decentralized big data. And that's pretty attractive to learn how that works and what kind of things can be learned from that. So that's why these companies are participating. So now they're in it, and that's the first part. And the second part is an appreciation for how information bubbles up into the mainstream consciousness from the Bitcoin space. And I'm going to stop referring to it as a community and referring to it as the space. Because it's now a lot larger than noisy Reddit and the ability for any one single entity to like pump out. For instance, Bitcoin XT is a great example of this. Why it's now the space and not a community. Because Bitcoin XT has been a monumental failure of traditional marketing efforts. And those marketing channels were all of the places that the Bitcoin faithful participate. However, even in that effort, it still failed to influence the groups that it needed to influence in order for that to catch on, in an organic fashion. All that being said, so that's a good tie-in actually to how information moves in the space, and that is it starts as these discussions on Reddit or in the forums and. Or on side forums or in chat rooms or whatever. And then someone like a CoinDesk reporter or a Cointelegraph reporter catches wind of it, and they come to someone like me and say, hey, what do you know about this? What do you think about it? And then they go and they do some fact finding, and then they write an article, and then it becomes the news, and it shows up in CoinDesk or Cointelegraph. Now, CoinDesk is the industry standard for news within the Bitcoin space, period, end of sentence.
Yeah. And it's the go-to place for information, yeah.
Right. And that's because when larger media outlets turn to see what's going on in Bitcoin, if it's not on CoinDesk, it's not really happening. We know the block halving is happening next July. It's actually moved from September to July. And when that occurs, as it gets closer, people are going to get excited. Because there's going to be less Bitcoin produced every day. It's going to go from 3,600 coins every day to 1,800 coins a day. And there will never be this many Bitcoin produced ever again. So you hear people talk about the 1 in a million club. That's if you own 21 Bitcoin. There's only 1 million people on the whole planet that will ever own 21 Bitcoin.
And I think by that point, it will be too late for people to rush in and, start buying Bitcoin because they're going to be buying less and less. There's going to be less availability, and we're going to be splitting off into other cryptocurrencies. Or what do you think about that?
Let's not get crazy. I think there's still an amount of rolling volatility, which we've seen demonstrated in the past week, that still exists even in today's environment. So you can't be fooled by the media paradigm that Bitcoin is this large institutional, things are all steady and rock solid, when we can still have volatility like we've seen in the past week or two. It's still the exact same, it was almost lulled to sleep in the last 10 months. And everyone expected a 200 to 250 price channel, and then suddenly it broke out. Hey, that's because it's still the same network it was 2 years ago. There's just more people doing it now. But everybody's still manipulating things the same way because that's how you manipulate markets. And what you see is this net effect where it looks a lot like the S&P 500. If you look at the S&P 500 charts historically, Bitcoin actually follows a very same trend pattern. And that bodes well for Bitcoin. That's great. You can stop thinking about it. You can stop pontificating on it. It's still possible to destroy the network. It's with a very minimal investment. If Bitcoin ever really became a threat, here's the deal. Here's the real deal, right?
Okay.
6 months ago, it would have cost $150 million to take over the Bitcoin network. Today, it would take about $250 million to take over the Bitcoin network. When you consider that Jamie Dimon has probably $50 trillion in assets under his direct control, that's trillion with a T compared to million with an M. He could take a shit and poop out enough money to be able to crush the Bitcoin network at any time and never say anything to anyone ever. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Now it puts into context something you previously said, in which people don't understand the true potential or destructive power of trillions of dollars, or they
Right.
they think that somehow billions or millions will rescue us from this disparate situation.
Here's
Tell
an
me.
example. For instance, people say, "Oh, there's been $1 billion invested in the Bitcoin ecosystem and startups." Well, that's
Okay.
great. However, Toyota just invested $1 billion to give 200 people jobs in Silicon Valley to create artificial intelligence for cars. So this is not when people try to do the whole rah-rah cheerleading for Bitcoin, it sounds like it's a lot. It sounds like it's really big, but it's not. It's barely a drop in the ocean, and it's definitely more hype than substance. Because when you look at the actual implementation of these technologies, and even in the last 18 months, because once you have something like Factom or storage or these decentralized solutions, once you have them, it's just a matter of getting people on board to use them. And you get businesses to use them, and then they pay you money. And there are some companies in the space which are approaching this correctly. However, by the same token, they're also marching in the wrong direction. And they have to march in that wrong direction for the pendulum to swing back the other way towards that more egalitarian, decentralized future. And the thing that's going to swing the pendulum back the other way is going to be the intervening of law enforcement. In 2016, Bitcoin is going to have a house cleaning, mark my words. I promise you. They will clean. The government, the United States government, is going to come in and clean house next year. And a lot of people are going to go to jail, names that we know and names you've never heard of. I'm not going to be one of them.
No, I understand why, because there's no, I don't think there's virtue in martyrdom when you could just continue on growing and expanding the concept, because it is true. There's going to be an autocorrection, and people just let's remove it. Let's remove the word Bitcoin. We can use this formula to understand something bigger. You see, the state will not let go an inch. They will make you believe that you've won, and in that they will suppress and reform what you actually want. Once they clean house in Bitcoin, the government will take the blockchain. They will take control of the blockchain. They will take control of the direction of or how things will be used, or how you will use your Bitcoin, to be more exact.
By convincing people that the technology is beyond their reach.
Right.
And
The management of perception is really where this takes place, because either way, whether Bitcoin will be successful or not, what we're really pointing at here is that the information barrier, or the what is the obstacle in learning new things. It's what keeps us in this perpetual cycle in which we think that making mistakes or errors or the innovators are these dangerous phantoms that we shouldn't be associated with, because mistakes are very harmful. People don't have, I'm sorry to be this convoluted, Bryce, but I don't understand the irrationality of people. And when we speak of it, it's like it makes perfect, crisp sense. I want to just end up with a final positive note here, because eventually people will get to the point where you are at, where you've noticed that the only real thing you could do is what works for you and those around you. What can you tell the listeners on a final point? What do you think is the bigger picture, and what are the alternatives?
plan for the See, if you want to talk about what, and back to your very first question, what is an antagonist?
Okay.
An antagonist is not an enemy. I am not an enemy of Bitcoin. An antagonist is a counter to the protagonist, and it is an opposing and equal perspective. And for all of the Bitcoin media space, it only takes one person, me, to be the antagonist. And because that's how much groupthink goes on, and that's how thin the bubble really is in actuality. That it only takes one person to pump it. And as things move forward, you will see more people like me appear as they become, and there are. I will go ahead and say the CEO of ZapChain, which just got I think 350,000 in funding, and very well deserved so. He's been nominated for Forbes' 30 under 30 twice. He's not a fool by any stretch of the imagination. He's a brilliant, brilliant man, and he's able to execute things that in organizations that most people can't. I'll be the first to say it. And even he sees it. And when you have the best and the brightest that are outside of Bitcoin looking in and seeing the same problems that someone like me, an old man at 40, right, that has been around since the early days but never really said anything, sees, you have to take heed. And because this is not the way things are going to be, right? And the way things are not the way things are going to be. And the pendulum is going to swing back the other way in the next 18 months. Mark my words. But it's going to be one of the best things that's ever happened.
Hopefully, right? One can really hope that perhaps this will unfold nicely, but let's keep to some healthy skepticism, which what you're reminding us, and not to be so into groupthink that we can't see the reality outside of that.
See the big picture, see the longer view of history, the longer now, and you will see exactly what it is that what I'm talking about, and it's blatantly obvious, and it's pretty, and the reason why people don't see it is because the community is so small, and most of the people are the ones doing it.
Where can my listeners get at you and shoot questions and follow your content?
Oh, my Twitter feed is kind of is ground zero for, I guess, the antagonism of Bitcoin. At BryceWeiner.
So that's the best place to get at you then, right?
Yes, sir.
Any more final thoughts, Bryce?
Oh, thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm always glad to talk to people. It's pretty much what I do all day long is build bridges.
I'm actually honored, Bryce, because I really respect you. And you're right. The antagonist is not the enemy. He's just the one who speaks ill when it needs to be spoken. People don't want to say mean things. People don't want to be hurtful or harmful. But sometimes you just got to point out and say, that's a mole. That's not something I like to see. And when you see these mistakes or these ugliness unfolding or apparent to you, and you don't say anything, you're building to the corruption. The pendulum will swing back, but when it swings back, you don't want to be in its pathway. It's going to chop your head off. You want to be in the pathway of reality and truth.
Quite frankly, that's why I have decided to take the trajectory that I have, because I'm aiming for that pendulum swing, the next one, not this one, but what comes next. And it's been hard. I've had to sever a lot of ties in the process. But by the same token, I always plan to be the last man standing. So far, so good.
That's a good way to see it, but because ultimately you are only experiencing yourself and nothing else. Your immediate reality is what's important. And I want to be presumptuous, and I think you're a fellow Discordian. Is that not right?
Well, I don't really hide it. There have been some Hagbard Celine and Yellow Submarine jokes, every now. Like I said, I've been out there a bit before Bitcoin. And when Bitcoin has seen its heyday and we've all moved on to something else, I'll probably be there too.
Well, hopefully on our next conversation, we can talk about those conspiracy theories you speak of, because man, that's a big topic I want to get into you and your experience. So I really want to know what's going on in your world.
It's a lot of fun. I'm more than happy to do so.
All right. Well, thank you, Bryce. And thank you, listeners, for joining us in this very important conversation. We're going to finalize this show, but shoot me any questions. If you think this conversation was not in depth, or if there's more truth to follow, please point to where we should follow you. Thank you very much, Bryce. Have a nice day.
You too, sir. Thank you very much.